Hello everybody, this is Yannick Zenhäusern in my studio. Today with one simple question. Is the Aaron Venture Infinite Brass Library the ultimate brass library? The answer to that question you will find in the end of this video. So it's been a long time since I did my last review video of a product of a VST or a library or whatever. And this time I decided to do one because this one is pretty much a game changer again. A couple of years ago, I've discovered the product line of Sample Modeling, now Audio Modeling, who did brass, woodwinds, and strings. I'm still a big fan of them, and I really love their product, still use them, and it really changed the way I could do brass and brass arrangements for whatever, film, game music, or whatever. Then I've discovered this BBC2, Breath and Bite Controller 2 by Tech Control, which I've also reviewed on this channel. And so just to give you a quick note, there's some introductory words. You can skip right to the playing part and the taking apart segment of the video a bit later on. I will do that in the description box, tell you where exactly it is. But I think it is important to tell these things to sort of lead up to this library. Because like I said, there's a reason why I reviewed this library. For many years, I was really constricted when it came to brass because it is the most difficult thing to trick or to do a mock-up of, simply because how dynamic the instruments are, with the breath and everything. Strings these days can be done quite easily. Any instrument that has a key can be done quite convincingly as well. Brass has always been, has been difficult to do. Now the thing is, there are a lot of traditional libraries still out there, and they do, they update them, the big players, but it's still, the problem is that many times these libraries are handled with key switches and stuff like that. And as of today, I cannot make this stuff work for me. It's not intuitive. In many cases, it doesn't sound good, because if you, for instance, come out of a staccato sequence, you go into a legato sequence, you can tell that, for instance, the attack of the notes, they vary, and it doesn't sound convincing. And then I've discovered the sample modeling line, which I'm still a big fan of, like I said. But the problem is they also come with their downsides a little bit. I still use them very much, but sample modeling offers, great flexibility, playability of brass instruments, almost to making it ultra realistic. However, sample modeling, I felt, while still endorsing them, I felt always they lack a little bit in the sound department. So especially, when you go into the lower parts of the spectrum, like trombones, bass trombones, cymbassos, tubas, euphoniums, they sort of lacked the punch. They were very playable, but the sound was not as full as you'd wish, and especially when coming to a recording situation in an orchestra hall or something like that, where the reverb and everything adds to the gravitas of the sound. And no matter how much EQing and adding reverb I did, I never got it to really sound like those instruments were recorded in an orchestral context. Great for band stuff and stuff like that, but it was just not enough to really make it sound convincing for an orchestra. So I always had to combine it with, in my case, Cinesamples or Vivibrass, which were, Vivibrass is an exception. But Cinesamples is built up like many libraries are. They have a great full sound, but again, the playability is very, very limited. And so I most of the times I end up combining these two things to make it sound, to have a little bit of the playability aspect, but again, to have a good full sound of the instruments. But it was by no means an organic process. So always, before even coming to the brass, I had to think, how I'm going to do this. How am I going to handle the switches between marcato and staccato? How I'm going to switch it. And so it was very restricting, and it was in no way an organic process, like I said. And that was always a little bit of a turn down. And so what I always wound up doing is I did the bare minimum of the brass parts that I needed to do. So a little bit of trumpet. Sometimes I had to scratch whole ideas because I couldn't make the trumpet work the way I wanted it. And then I had other things, when I had a little bit of trumpet, a little bit of trombone, maybe a tuba, and then the French horns and so on. But everything was very restricted. And just to sum it up, I couldn't really write the stuff that I wanted. because it was always dictated by the technical limitations and what sounded okay and convincing. Because brass, I'm very particular about brass, because that's usually the first thing that gives away a mock-up. And so I'm very particular when it comes to that. So I've always longed for a library that would offer me best of both worlds, the playability while still having a great sound. And in the last couple of years, there were updates done, the big players, they have released new libraries and stuff like that. But again, never had that product that really offered me best of both worlds. And so a couple of nights ago, I was browsing through my Facebook feed, and I saw, I don't know what it was, but how it came to be displayed. But I saw this ad or someone commenting about Infinite Brass. So I went to the YouTube page where I saw Aaron Venture himself, playing through the stuff, a walkthrough video, and I said, "Wow, this could be it." Now, bear in mind, I'm quite hesitant to jump to conclusions too early, because I've had that many times in the last couple of years where I saw new libraries and stuff like that, and then listened to it more closely, and I could, again, the limitations, the technical limitations could be heard. And so, but I said, when I listened to that stuff, I said, "Wow, this sounds really like that thing I was looking for." And then I said, well, maybe I'm just dreaming a little bit, and I went to sleep. I read some comments on forums, what I usually do, and some commented on the lack of sound again, the lack of punch. What I have to say, that was a couple of years ago, some of these comments. No, not a couple of years, a couple of months, I don't know. But meanwhile, some updates have been done. We're in version 1.5 in Infinite Brass. And next day, and I thought, maybe it's because of the mobile phone. I mean, everything sounds good or shitty on the mobile phone. And so I said, okay, I'm going to check this out, listen on the big speakers, and it sounded amazing. And so I got it because it's not a cheap library. I mean, it's over $400, but it's worth every cent. And then I got it, and I dabbled around a little bit with it, and I have to say, my mind was blown. Because, and I can't stress this enough, I really had the full and fat sound that I wanted from a brass library, and I could play what I was thinking of. And you see me, I'm getting all emotional, because that's really a milestone, because, beforehand, like I said, I had to think, how I'm going to do this and that, and I didn't even think about parts that I could add that would add something to the composition. I would just do very limited brass. But now I felt inspired, and I wanted to, I've occupied these 3 trombones, and I have some trombones left. What could they do? I'll figure out a little counter melody and just play it and try around with it. And it was a mind-blowing experience. Really, I have to say that. And it's so well done. This whole library is so fantastic, because the programming is so well done. We're going to discover that in a bit. And the sound, and even later on, because sometimes these brass libraries, they sound good on their own, but then in the context of a whole composition, when mixed and mastered, sometimes, the drums, the trumpets, they get lost in certain frequencies, so they get swallowed by the composition. Sometimes they pierce through too much, so they get really aggressive and annoying. And especially in the lower register, like trombones, bass trombones, and so on, they lack the punch. And I had to say, I did a composition, which I'm going to dissect later in this video. I did a composition where I really had to say, wow, it comes through. The trumpets come through just nicely and perfectly. The trombones, they have the weight. The tuba really has that slurry sort of sound. It's really fantastic. And while still being able to, I can play anything. I can play everything and anything that I want. And so I think without further ado, we're going to jump right in it. So you load this stuff in your Contact player, and you can add different instances of an instrument. You can see here the list of the instruments, and here you can see, just how it is. Then you load these things, and the first problem is, in some libraries that are built upon single instruments, they have a problem that they tend to phase. When you add more instances of an instrument, they start to phase each other out, which is technically an error, and sounds bad, of course. But it doesn't happen with that, because when you go into the details of each instrument, you can see all the things that you can set up. And by the way, I'm not going to do a technical review. This is not a technical review. There are some others out there to do that. Aaron himself did a great video explaining everything. This is really a review of this library as a user, as a composer. So you can see there's a little bit of humanized function going on that makes sure that this phasing doesn't happen. So there's a little bit of a difference between each and every instrument. And of course, I use this breath controller, breath and bite control. So you can bite into it, you can breathe it, you can tilt and pan your head and assign different CC values to that, so different parameters. And it's very easy to set up. So the dynamics, you just learn CC automation, and then you move or blow into this thing the way you want it, and then you can control the parameters. Then you have your different mic setups, and then you can even position your instruments in a virtual space. So this is usually done for you, which is great, but you can further adjust this. What I sometimes do is I pan them even a little more, because I feel like these positioning tools, they're a little bit conservative. So I really like to have my usual orchestral setup is trombones, tuba, euphonium, trumpets are really hard to the right, and French horns are hard to the left. So I add a little bit more to that. And the sound, as you load it up, is really fantastic. It's really convincing. It's good. It has you can choose between the 3 different rooms. And sometimes I add a little bit of reverb after that. I use Altiverb 7 just to add a longer tail to it, which then really makes it perfect. And then you can add effects like flutter, growl, vibrato, depth, rate, and so on. Now what I did is, now I have 3 instances of a trumpet, and the more instruments you load, the fatter the sound gets, of course. So what I did is, when I blow, the note intensity is controlled. When I, pen my head to the right, I control the vibrato with that, and if I tilt my head up, I control the flutter tone. So let's just see. So now let's play a little bit with this. Another great thing about the programming is that the attack is actually controlled by how hard you hit the keys. So if you play the keys softly, the attack is very soft as well. And if you want to do stabs, so staccato, you hit the notes harder and there's more attack to it. So now you can see, again, programming is fantastically done. It has the note bends, so to connect notes. And you can also play it, which allows you to make rips or falls. Many libraries, they come with falls presets, fast and slow falls. But now you have complete control because you can play this stuff. Now this allows you to play very dynamic, and I'm going to show this later on. This is the next bit that we're going to do. But usually I will play a little melody like that before with the old libraries. I did something like this. Doing just a bare minimum of notes. But now with this library, you can play very dynamic, like an actual trumpet player would. So you add little slurs and little little build-ups and stuff like that. So as opposed to, you add little things. Now, another thing is that many of these libraries that are built on single instruments, you run into a problem. I want to play a chord, for instance. Now, this is a legato mode, so one note. Now, let's say I'm playing all the three trumpets, let's assume, are playing the same melody. And then at one point, I want to go into divisi, so the different trumpets play different melodies at once. Now, this was a problem that I had with sample modeling, for instance. Of course, in that case, I could I could use another library and record all three. When it's a triad, for instance, record all three notes, and then add the top notes to one French horn, for instance, the middle notes to another instance of a French horn, the low notes on another instance. But that was not intuitive. Again, it's not good for creativity. And so this can be done very easily by pressing the sustain pedal, which lets you go into the divisi mode, so you can play multiple notes at once while still sounding good. Now, I suggest you, when you play single notes, to use the legato mode and only use divisi when you really want to play three note chords or multiple note chords, because of course when you're in the divisi mode, many of the programming, the little slurs and stuff like that, they don't really work, or they sound artificial. So let's see. Again, sforzando sounds great. Now those are the trumpets. Now let's see how the other instruments sound. Let's look at the trombones. Again, great, especially in the middle and lower registers. It sounds so fantastic and fat, Let's just listen. Now what I call the deep trombones is basically two chimbassos and a bass trombone. Really great for the stabby stuff, Again, press the pedal to have multiple notes. You can also use very interesting mutes, to make special sounds. Again, very easy. You can just slide through them like that, and you can look for your sound. And then let's listen to an instance of Tuba and Euphonium. Now that's really the slurry, bassy stuff, and again, great sound. Sounds very fat. And the French horns, which I love to use, for instance, for playing big melodies. That's the classic composer's move. Okay, so those were some of the examples, just playing a bit. And like I said, this is plain playing, and you can achieve most things. I would say when you play like I did, you get your 70 to 80% there to the final product. There's only a little bit of maybe adjustments that you'll need to do in the post-production, but it's very limited, and it's not like you have to spend hours like with other libraries to do things afterwards. Now let's listen to a little sequence I've recorded beforehand. Let's listen to the elements individually. The trumpets, for instance. Now listen to the trombones. Now let's listen to the tuba euphonium. And the French horns. So that's only a rough recording. You could add much more detail and, little slurs and little lead-up notes and stuff like that. But that was just a plain presentation. And by the way, there's not much EQing on this, and I haven't added any reverb at all. That's just how it is, the way you load it up when you actually use the software. So you could add a little bit of reverb. You could use a little bit of EQ. I don't do too much EQ on these instruments because they're balanced pretty well. Sometimes I cut off, under, we'll say, maybe 100 hertz. I cut off the tuba so it doesn't have a lot of muddiness going on in the bass section, especially when you have a big orchestral composition. And sometimes I add a little bit of top end to the trumpets, but ever so slightly. I don't do much with it, and a little bit of reverb. And now we're going to switch to another part of the video where I'm going to show you, I'm not going to play as much anymore, but I'm going to show you how this works within a composition I made. This is for our game we're working on, S.P.I.E.S Don't Die. This is an action cue for when, pardon the expression, shit hits the fan. And this will be a little bit of a show and tell, and I'll dissect that a little bit and you can hear what is going on exactly. Now this is a very important piece to me because it's probably in my whole career the first piece where I could really fully express myself through the brass and really do what I wanted to. So there's a lot of wild stuff going on, a lot of transitions and stuff like that, and we're going to listen to that now. So this composition started with an idea when I was actually washing the dishes. It was just a snare drum, field drum sequence that I had in my mind that was just... And then I recorded that, and it's this one here. Okay. The next idea that I had was to have bass strings, doing really fast bass notes, staccato notes, and it sounded like that. And the next thing that I came up with, the next idea that I had was actually to have the trombones play a little melody. The one that I just showed you before, which is basically this. So this was the whole idea that I had, and it sounded like that. And I hope it's not going to be too fragmented because my system is getting quite challenged. Now I can say the instruments, the brass instruments, they have a very small footprint. They're very well to use, and they don't use a lot of RAM. But there's so much stuff going on, and I have a lot of reverb added to the stuff. But let's just try and listen. I hope it's not going to be too bad. So you can see how that manifests. And then afterwards I had the idea of adding, really in the deep brass section, so the cymbassos, the bass trombones, they should play these quite fast and aggressive little staccato notes. You can hear them now. So you can hear this stuff that the trombones do. This is old stuff, it's changed between staccato, marcato, legato, and this stuff I had to put so much thought into before I discovered this library, and now I can just really play it, and that's the fantastic thing. I mean, sometimes what I do is I just record the basic ideas that I have, and then I look for different counter melodies and little things to add, and that's really the great thing about this library. It allows me to do that. That's where I come up with this stuff. So now let's listen to that a little bit more. The tuba, for instance, and the trumpets I've added later. The tuba, I really wanted to have those slurry. Let's just listen to how that sounds. So you get a little bit of an idea. And then lastly, I've added the French horn. The French horn, my idea was to have this is sort of the main villain theme that comes in. It's just and that I let the French horns do. So we're going to listen how that sounds now. And also at the beginning, at this build-up stage, they add a little bit of counter melodies and a little bit of a little bit of action, and a little bit of this mayhem going on. Let's just listen to it. there we go. Now, the final question, of course, is this the library that answers all our prayers? And, I don't have a huge channel. There's not millions of people on my channel watching my reviews, but I'm well aware, especially what I learned from the old sample modeling reviews, that there are a lot of people visiting this channel just to get an idea of my reviews and the stuff that I do. And I'm aware that I have a certain responsibility. And having said that, I would say yes. This is probably the ultimate brass library. Because again, you could hear for yourself the versatility, the playability, the sound that comes out of that, and just overall the experience, the way it inspires you, the sky is the limit. You can do what you want. And like I said, I've had many libraries over the years, and I have many libraries, but this is going to be my go-to brass library because it just exceeds in every aspect I could think of. And so I would say yes. For me, this is the ultimate brass library. Now, to really give you a good sense of how this sounds in context, I will let you listen to this cue properly mixed, mastered, and done, programmed properly, having done a little bit of the post work, and you can hear for yourself how it sounds. Again, very important that it still maintains that good sound within a context of a whole composition, which I also think it does just brilliantly. But have a listen for yourself. And by the way, it's going to sound slightly different tune, because in order to be able to record this video and the sound coming out of Cubase, I had to change the sample rate, and now I have to change it back. So it's going to be slightly another tune, but still you will be able to hear what I'm talking about. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope if you want to get this library, you're going to have as much fun as I have with it. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.